There's always an audience for this sort of thing, but I have to be persuaded it really would improve our life in a lot of ways. And you are encouraging people who perhaps don't know that much about politics and know that they don't, to go to the ballot box and perhaps vote randomly. Quite a lot of the evidence suggests what's called proximity voting, that is voting close to the view that you have, goes down sharply when you encourage people when you use compulsion to get people to the ballot box.
With MPs and think tanks floating the idea of compulsory voting to boost low turnouts, new research suggests forcing people to the ballot box might actually do more harm than good. In the Times tomorrow, the Conservative peer and Times columnist, occasional Times at One host Danny Finkelstein argues that mandatory voting won't build trust in politicians, but will instead lead to wild spending promises and polarising politics. Danny joins us now. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
So this would sensationalise election campaigning if it became mandatory for people to have to vote.
Well, look, there's quite a lot of evidence on it. So there are a few places in the world that do it, for example, Australia, and people have done studies on it. So, for instance, Austria had it for a period, and then in 1992 it had abolished it. So you could see the difference between those two periods. And as I think common sense dictates, it won't, of course, increase trust in politicians. More interestingly, it also does lead to larger spending governments. So it was very much in the interests of the Australian Labor Party, and you'll notice the kind of organisation that promotes this is generally on the left, wants higher spending, and hopes this will change the nature of the electorate, which it might do in a very big way. So there are a lot of practical arguments, but in the end, I also have a kind of liberal argument, which is if you don't have to force somebody to do something, then you shouldn't.
Which is totally fair enough. What about if it was mandatory, but there was a box on every vote paper saying none of the above? That has also been suggested.
There is that, and people come to the polls, they vote randomly. Sometimes they leave the ballot paper blank, and even when you have this, you know, in Australia, the turnout is often about 90%. So you're then pursuing 10% of the electorate for £10, you know, quite a big distraction. You'd have to convince me that it was really worth doing that in order to force people to do something which they don't. You know, not voting is a choice, and you know, one of the elements of the choice is whether you feel strongly enough about something to actually make the journey all the way to the ballot box. And what people are suggesting is that I should force people to go to the ballot box so that you get the least well-informed, least interested voters, drowning out those people who could be bothered in the first place. And, you know, just for me, I don't think that's a great plan.
There is the argument as well that actually you could force everyone to vote, but in constituencies where it's pretty cut and dried, it's not actually going to change the result. So it doesn't matter whether, you know, 40% of people or 60% or 100% of people turn out. You are still going to get the same sort of via towards a particular party. And in marginal constituencies, well, actually, voter turnout tends to be pretty high anyway, doesn't it?
Well, to start off with, let's give the people credit who propose this. It's usually part of a package. Those people tend to also believe in electoral reform, so I suppose this problem wouldn't be the same. Whatever electoral system you use, of course, has its own particular foibles and encourages or discourages certain types of voting. But in the end, you still have to make a decision about whether you're going to force people to do something. And I would say that in this country, we generally tend not to do that, and we're very, very slow to force people to do something, even though there are quite often quite big lobbies. So I started my article with a list of things that people thought should be compulsory. For example, that something like 20% of people believed after COVID that we should permanently stop people going out after 10 o'clock at night without a good reason. So there's always an audience for this sort of thing, but I have to be persuaded it really would improve our life in a lot of ways. And you are encouraging people who perhaps don't know that much about politics and know that they don't, to go to the ballot ballot box and perhaps vote randomly. Quite a lot of the evidence suggests what's called proximity voting, that is voting close to the view that you have, goes down sharply when you encourage people when you use compulsion to get people to the ballot box.
Yeah, it's an interesting point to make. Look, Danny, you're going to be on How to Win this week, I think, which is the brilliant Times podcast, where you and a whole host of won't go into everyone's names, but a whole host of brilliant names talk about the week in politics. But just a preview from you, you've been none too shy of a policy in the past, putting them together, helping government construct them. What do you make of what Andy Burnham's done so far? So those small cost of living measures last week, 3 of those. And then this week, we're going to get a rollout of big policy chunks. We've got the young and technical skills, NEETs, social care tomorrow. We're going to hear more about defence this week and devolution too. What do you make of the way that Andy Burnham's going about this?
The time to set out his stall rather than lean on the first 2 or 3 things he did and say, he doesn't know how to pay for them, because we haven't got to a budget yet and we'll find out the answer to that question. My view has always been Andy Burnham is not like just another Keir Starmer who was very opaque, very difficult to understand what it was he stood for. Andy Burnham has developed over, quite a long period in politics, quite a lot of views, and he's now beginning to do them. As it happens, that wouldn't be how I would run the country if I was Prime Minister, but I'm not. So I'm, I sort of quite understand why some Labour people are quite enthusiastic about it. Let's see what he's got to do, what he's going to do. But I think early on, it seems this view that he's just going to be another person who flip-flops and doesn't stand for anything. That probably won't turn out to be true. There is a core to what he believes, and he's going to develop that. I think it will lead the country to, higher tax, more government, more regulation, the European social model when we're not in the European Union. I don't think that's the mixture for the country personally, but it's a perfectly credible position for a Labour Prime Minister to lay out, and I think the country will respond positively to at least somebody in Downing Street knowing what they think, even if it's not the same as what I think.
Look, good answer. Thank you. We'll hear more from you, I'm sure. And you're back on the Times at 1 on August the 24th, so pop that in your diaries. Danny Finkelstein there, Conservative peer, Times columnist. Danny writes in the paper tomorrow. You'll see it online, if not now, then a bit later on. Danny, thanks so much.
Thank you for asking me.
Cheers, Danny Finkelstein there. It's the evening edition. It's Kait Borsay. It's Times Radio with Handelsbank and Real Relationship Banking. Start your conversation at handelsbank.co.uk. Coming up, we'll speak to one employer who's been involved in the MBAC. It is Andy Burnham's initiative in Manchester, much of which is taken forward to bring to a national...